Hey guys, in the last episode, I shared to you guys about my plans to enter the 24 Hours of Lemons race with a few of my friends. And if you guys couldn't tell, I really am pumped about doing that. But I think what excites me as much as a race itself is the chance to own a really dirt cheap car that I can enjoy working on with some of my buddies and building it into something that we can all smile at. So in this episode, I am going to narrate over the footage that I captured in the last 2 days, May 18th and May 19th, in our hunt for the perfect $500 beater car that we will look to enter into the 24 Hours of Lemons race. So this is the footage of me driving back home in the rain on the evening of May 19th, which is a Saturday. It was actually earlier today. And by the way, if you already recognize a car from just a dash, that's really impressive. If you haven't yet recognized the car, don't worry. Of course, I will show you what a gem we found later on. So we started our search with this Craigslist ad, and I'll give you guys a moment to skim through it because it's fascinating. We had compiled a list of Craigslist ads in the area to check out over the weekend, but this one to me stood out the most. I mean, it's everything that we could have hoped for in terms of getting a Lemons car. He says he has one that's perfectly running for $500 that I was hoping that I could negotiate down to something like, I don't know, $350. You guys know how Craigslist pricing works. Or at the very least, have him throw in another parts car for something like $500 altogether. And I just immediately fell in love with the idea of racing a Festiva because for some reason, I didn't really want a conventional sports car. For the Lemons race, I wanted something that no one in their right mind would look at and say that would make a good race car. So even though I didn't know much about Festivas, this ad just hooked my attention. So we took off work as early as we could on Friday and headed over to Maryland, about an hour away from where we work. So we got there around 7 p.m. as the sun was going down, really only to find out that the one running Festiva, the yellow one, had already been sold. But he did say he had 2 other running ones, so I still kind of had my hopes up at that point. So he had this red one sitting at the front of the house, and again, I just fell in love with it as soon as I saw it. Look how small the wheels are. Greg also seemed to be kind of fascinated with this Festiva, even though I don't think he was as into it as I was. So we tried to get the owner to start the car and idle it, and it turns out that he was using the word running pretty liberally. So Festivas have this tiny 4-banger engines that make something like 60 horsepower, and that's when it's new, and this red one only had 2 cylinders running. So we tried to get it to idle for a while, but we didn't have much luck, so we headed back to his backyard where he was holding a bunch more.
Gotcha, so we don't know if the other 2...
By the way, I should mention that none of the team members, including myself, are really that experienced at working on cars. I think it's fair to say that we all know more than the average Joe, and do come with varying experiences tweaking and toying with cars, but we all probably bring in a lot more enthusiasm and willpower to the table than actual experience and working knowledge when it comes to getting a beater to run reliably. So that's why we are looking for something that at least starts and runs. It doesn't have to do it perfectly, it doesn't have to even have all cylinders firing, but we weren't really looking for a roller frame to start our build, and we certainly wanted to avoid doing a total engine rebuild to start our race car build, or doing an engine swap if we could avoid it at all. So at this point, we did head into his backyard where at least like 5 more Festivas were just littered around. And this guy's story is actually kind of fascinating. So apparently one of the Festivas is like his first car, and apparently someone drove by his house and noticed his Festiva parked out front. And apparently that person owned a junkyard or something like that and asked him, "Would you like 5 more of these?" And unlike a normal person, he said, "Yes, I would like 5 more of these because I'm constantly looking for parts." But he was moving soon in the next week or so, and he needed to get rid of these pretty quickly. So that's his story of how he came to own 6 Festivas that he needs to sell.
This one has a new radiator,
And this funky one that you're looking at now, I think he said it was his original car, and this one ran just beautifully. It had 300,000 miles on the odometer, but it just sounded mint. Like no smoke, and idled really well, and we just had no doubt that this was the engine that we wanted to walk away with, but as you can see, this one had been T-boned. The red one out in the front of the yard had a body that was in great condition, but like I said, it had an engine that was just junk with no compression. That was running on like half the cylinders, which is really sad if you only have 4 cylinders. And it had like a trunk full of parts. So if you were going to work on a Festiva, we figured that we at the very least needed to get both of them, both the red one and this funky one. But we had to walk away without making a deal, primarily because neither of the cars were really drivable. If we wanted them, we would have to come back with some way to tow these cars back home. But once we got in the car and started driving away, I think Greg and I both kind of realized that although this is very amusing and potentially a lot of fun, we could also be signing ourselves up for a lot more upfront initial work than we had originally planned. Like again, our plan was to get something that was already running and have some fun with it before really digging into it. Like we know that in order to survive the Lemons race, we have to eventually learn how to completely disassemble the powertrain and learn how to put it back together. But we were hoping to kind of ease into that later in the process. So we did decide to spend the next day, Saturday, looking at a lot more cars and figuring out a lot more options, and decided to come back to the Festivas if we just couldn't find anything that was more suitable for our needs. So the next day, we were a lot more prepared to check out cars. So you can see the engine oil pressure test kit, compression test kit, a lot of different sockets, things that we just generally thought we needed to check out the condition of some of these cars, because where we were headed was a junkyard. And no, we're not idiots. We weren't really going to the junkyard because we thought we would find our project car there. I did tell Greg that chances were slim to none that we would find something that would be complete enough to drive home unless the car was literally brought in that day, but then again, you know, even if the car is complete, there's a reason why these cars end up in a junkyard, right? If it hasn't been in a catastrophic collision, there's probably something horrifically wrong with the engine. So we were just heading to the junkyard for 3 reasons. 1, it was on the way to a car that we really wanted to check out from a Craigslist ad, so why not try our luck? 2, Greg had never been in a junkyard before and wanted to see what it was like. And 3, because junkyards are just plain fun to gearheads. You know, I sometimes walk around junkyards even when I don't need anything because the entrance fee of $2 to get in is like way cheaper than a movie, but it's a lot more entertaining. So we get to the junkyard, and the lady checking us in and taking our $2 admission fees asked us what we were looking for, and we said something to drive home. And apparently that's not something that a lot of people say at junkyards, because she seemed like stumped for a solid 5 seconds, which isn't a great sign. But she did tell us that there were about a half dozen cars that were brought in like yesterday, and told us that the keys should be inside and we were free to go check them out. And the yard did have I think 6 to 10 relatively complete cars. And it was obvious that they were brought in very recently because no one had molested them yet. So there was this Civic Hybrid, Dodge Caravan, a Volvo, an Xterra, and this Dodge truck that I think Greg was weirdly fascinated by and wanted to take home for some reason. And then maybe there was a Corolla. I don't really remember because I just wrote them off almost immediately. None of them were very interesting to me. They were all automatics. None of them I really just wanted to work on. So we just decided to head into the junkyard to kill some time. Maybe the only interesting thing that we found in the front of the yard was this unidentified, awesome, but still awesome looking American muscle car. I don't know enough about American muscle cars from like the 60s and 70s to be able to identify this car with the front disassembled like that, but apparently it has a 442. It's a GM. If anyone knows what this is, let me know, because this looks really awesome.
Now, did the car come with the
I have
trash,
always
or people just
fantasized
using
about
it as
working on a
trash
big
can?
block V8 in a a muscle car like this.
Alright, if you know what this
I would
is,
love
let
to
me
be
know.
able to take it home, but one, I don't even think it's gonna fit in my garage, to be honest. And two, this isn't exactly what we're looking for. So I do hope that someone takes it home and restores it though. So here's a thing that I felt really pretty stupid about. Like I said, I do frequent junkyards, but I'm always looking for parts, not whole cars to drive home. So I didn't bring a battery, which is like the one thing that you should bring if you want to know which cars are actually capable of running. At the very least, you should bring a set of jumper cables so that you can find a battery that has a charge and see if any of the cars will crank. But again, at this point, we weren't really interested in cars, or we weren't really interested in any of the complete cars that they had there anyway, so we're just walking around and kind of amusing ourselves. As we were walking out though, we noticed a Corolla that we didn't see like 2 hours ago when we came in. The engine was actually still warm, but the car didn't have any tags, which meant that the car was here to stay at the junkyard. So we asked for the keys to it and went to go start it up, and of course it did start up, and we were kind of wondering if this would be our car.
Dude, that sounds pretty good.
You only got 87 grand on it.
Hold on.
No?
Can you rev it a little bit?
Don't stand in front of it while I'm revving it, just in case the park is
That sounds fun.
Dude, somebody cut the
It sounded okay, and if it drove in here, we could probably drive it out, right? So we were kind of joking around that we should pick a Toyota because they're impossible to kill and parts are obviously plentiful and cheap. But when the yard said it was $750, we didn't even bother negotiating, because the only reason I would want this thing is if we could get it for like 300 bucks. Also, it's an automatic, which is kind of a deal killer. So the car that we were on the way to see was a 1993 3000 GT, and you guessed it, this is the one that we would bring home later that day. But let me first show you the Craigslist ad, because I wasn't really that excited about this car before I inspected it in person. First, the price is set a little high. So I mean, not that the car itself is not worth $1,000, it's just that $1,000 is the maximum that we set the Craigslist filter as, since we only have a $500 budget. So if we were going to spend all of our $500 budget on the car itself, it pretty much needed to be running really well, with minimal performance work required. But the ad says that it's an owner's project car, which usually is a bad sign that someone just gave up on it for probably a good reason. And it also says, quote, runs and drives, which usually means that it's not running well. If the car is running well, the owners are always very quick to point that out. So I figured that this thing must have some issues. And lastly, Greg pointed out that this car comes in a 5-speed manual stock, not the 6-speed that the owner states in the ad. So I figured it's not stock, it's been molested, and it's probably getting dumped cheap by the owner who doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So the first thing that we noticed when we popped the hood on this thing is that it had an oil rag or like a microfiber towel underneath the engine oil filler cap. Because the cap was broken and it needed the rag to stay tightly on. And I didn't really think too much of it at the moment. I just figured we needed to buy a new cap. I just wrote it off as like a janky fix. But we'll come back to this later, since it turned out to be kind of a big deal.
Fix it up. Looking to do a Levens race.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. You heard of that?
No.
That's thought you would have wrapped it. I said, if you want to wash it. Yeah, maybe, yeah, if you don't mind.
But the next thing that we noticed was that the car was smoking really, really bad. Like more than any car I've seen on the road. Like I first thought it was white smoke, which would indicate that it's burning coolant, most likely due to a head gasket leak or even worse, like a cracked block. But upon closer inspection, the smoke was actually blue, which means that it's burning oil.
Looks like that might be.
To be fair, any engine with 200,000 miles on
Actually,
it
no, I
is
think that's
expected
oil.
to burn some amount
Yeah, I
of
think it's
oil,
oil.
but man, this was like bad, like James Bond getaway car smoke bad.
Like I couldn't tell from the video,
But
it's blue
you know, the car idled surprisingly fine, and it sounded pretty good when we revved it up, so we decided to take it out for a test drive. The owner was actually a pretty cool guy that basically let us do whatever we needed to do to inspect the car. So we took it for a drive, maybe a half mile down the road before we actually decided that it was not a good idea to continue the test
I think it
drive.
actually has power controls.
No, not power, but
Oh.
it does have controls. All right.
You want to film?
Sure. Its windows aren't going to go down.
Runs real weak. I was having trouble trying to get it to reverse without stalling.
Really? But it runs.
But it does run. Which is much.
Do you want me to get out and take a look on the road?
Yeah, I can't see shit.
You want me to actually, let you know if there's a car coming around?
Yeah.
Here. Step out real quick. Yeah, you're good to get it, to back up. All right. Hop in here with you.
Stalls out really easily.
Yeah.
Dude, it's not bad.
I mean, it fucking moves. It's, oh wow. There's a trail of smoke behind us.
Oh,
You
really?
can't see shit. Yeah, oh man, it's burning up. It's burning hard. Yeah, we can't drive this home. No way. I don't know if you can see that on the video at all, but it's like,
lot of
we're not
smoke.
good. We shouldn't even make the loop that he told us to make.
Why not?
Because we're gonna seize this engine, man. I don't think it's gonna,
I mean,
the amount of oil we're burning, look back there. You see that? Dude, there's no way. We gotta turn this thing around. We're gonna kill his car.
stop being a pansy.
No. It's not being a pansy. This is being like. Look at
Yeah,
that. No.
that's
You gotta stop. You
ton of
gotta
smoke.
stop. Turn around.
Alright, let's see.
I mean, it's not a big deal if it's burning oil. We can fix that. But
I wouldn't say that. It depends on like why it's burning oil, right?
Okay, fine, yeah. But we gotta make sure that we don't seize the engine up in the process of testing the car. If the engine seizes, we're done.
Well, despite the oil burn, runs pretty well.
Dude, you gotta flip the UE.
We're going back into the smoke.
Wow.
It's better
Feels
than,
okay.
better than the Corolla.
Forgive my friend Greg's
it's
kind of odd paranoia that we're going to seize this engine. I'm not totally sure where that's coming from, but it is a valid point that we really shouldn't be driving this on the road with this much smoke coming out the back. Or at the very least, we should stay clear of the highways. However, the car is running really well, almost too well for something that smokes this much. I'm convinced at this point that it should be a simple fix. It might be a burnt valve, maybe it has a stuck oil ring, because this engine certainly doesn't pull like it's junk or it's low on compression or something like that. So we get back to the house and start doing some diagnostics, like pulling out the spark plugs. And sorry, this part isn't filmed because I was busy wrenching, but we did find out that cylinder number 3 was a culprit in burning oil. That plug came out dripping wet. So at this point, the owner reveals that his bottom pricing is something like $700, and that is quite higher than the $500 bucks we had in mind. But I was starting to think that this thing was a workable gem. Like, I was really starting to like this thing. So we went off to get some lunch to talk it over, and we kind of debated about whether we wanted to buy this thing for $700. Long story short, after some debating, we did decide that we wanted it. Now, my main reservation up until that point was not really regarding anything mechanical. It was really more the fact that we already spent $200 over the budget, and I knew that this car, looking how it looks, would attract too much unwanted attention from the BS judges at the Lemons pre-race inspection, where they're trying to determine if something is really worth $500, and we'd be more or less guaranteeing that we get slapped some heavy penalties in terms of negative laps and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we just want to go racing with a car that we can be excited about, and even if this is a car that we can't ever expect to win a Lemons race with because of the penalties, I realized I could still wake up every day excited to work on this car, so I think that is, again, what really matters. So on the way back, we stopped by AutoZone and picked up some engine oil and coolant to top the fluids off, and a oil cap to replace a broken one. And the cap costs like $8, so we'll probably brush that one underneath the rug in terms of cost. So we handed over the $700 in cash, got the signed over clear title, and planned a route back to North Virginia, only using, remote small roads because we didn't want to smoke up the freeway. Also, we didn't want to get stuck in like stop and go traffic on I-95 with a manual car that we didn't really quite trust yet. But on the way back, something amazing happened. In the first 5 minutes, like, there was no more smoke, like, at all. The car ran even better than before, and I was seeing virtually no smoke through the rear windshield. And then I realized that the old oil cap that was using a rag to stay on was probably causing a massive vacuum leak, and for reasons I don't yet understand, that was making the engine burn insane amounts of oil. Like, holy crap, why didn't I think of that before? Like, why did I think that a rag that was holding an engine oil cap in place, like, that would be an acceptable fix? So, man, I felt like so dumb and relieved at the same time. But, the 3000 GT was now running like it was new. Well, no, I take that back. There's still plenty of room for improvement, but it's now running 10 times better than it was when we were test driving it. And needless to say, we made it back without any issues whatsoever, except for the fact that I stalled it out a couple of times because I'm not a great manual driver, to be honest, and to make matters worse, the throttle sticks really badly when it's closed. So that's the story of how this team got our Lemons car. And I'll be keeping it at my place next to the Datsun 280Z, so both of these rusty babies can stay out of the rain. By the way, if you guys have any suggestions on what this car should be named, because our best idea so far is Steve, let us know. Or if you have an idea of what our team's theme should be for the Lemons race, let me know that as well. Well, see you guys next time.
that's something we can fix. Hammer it out. Might not make it out of there.
Too muddy right now?
No, I just